Black hotel maid spoke Dutch on the phone. The millionaire stopped everything to see. The lobby of the Harrington Grand glittered with marble floors polished so carefully that chandeliers shimmered in their reflection. Guests glided across the expanse in tailored suits and designer dresses, their voices carrying accents from every corner of the world. At the far edge of that magnificent space, bent low with a mop in her hand, was Serena Davis. The only thing about her that shone was the sheen of sweat on her forehead. Her uniform, starched and stiff, had never fit comfortably, and no one who walked past spared her more than a fleeting glance. She was invisible by design, expected to be there, expected to work, never expected to be seen. But on that morning, in the quiet hum of footsteps and the faint smell of lemon polish, her world tilted in a way no one could have predicted. Serena's pocket vibrated once, twice, and then again. She froze. The rules were clear. No phones during work. Mr. Reynolds, her supervisor, made sure to bark that command at every meeting, his eyes always lingering on her as though she were the one most likely to break it. Normally she would have silenced the call and pushed through her shift. But this number wasn't ordinary. She had waited for it through 6 years of night shifts, of applications unanswered, of dreams tucked into the corner of her small apartment like dust beneath the bed. It was from the university in Amsterdam, the one that might finally allow her to pursue her master's degree in linguistics. Her heart raced as though it might break her ribs. She glanced around. Guests were distracted, the front desk busy. She stepped behind a column of veined marble and whispered to herself, "Just one moment." Her hands trembled as she answered, "Serena Davis." The voice on the other end spoke Dutch, the words crisp and elegant, slicing through the noise of the lobby. Without hesitation, Serena responded in perfect Dutch, her tongue shaping each syllable with the confidence of someone who had studied for years, someone who lived and breathed language. She spoke quickly, trying to keep her voice low, explaining how her letter of motivation had been delayed, how she feared the opportunity had slipped away again. And then she felt it, a shift, the kind of silence that prickles at the back of your neck. She turned slowly and her breath caught. Just a few feet away, Alexander Coleman, the billionaire owner of the Harrington Grand, and one of the most powerful figures in international hospitality, stood watching her. His eyes, sharp and discerning, were fixed entirely on her, as though the marble, the chandeliers, and the parade of guests no longer existed. His presence carried weight. Executives straightened their ties when he entered a room. Managers rehearsed speeches for days before daring to brief him. And here he was, listening to the words of a maid speaking Dutch with the ease of a native. Beside him stood Mr. Reynolds. His lips pressed tight, his face burning with indignation. The sight of Serena breaking the sacred rule of silence, worse, speaking in a language he didn't understand, was, to him, unforgivable. Serena's voice faltered, her cheeks burning as she realized the enormity of what had just happened. She forced the call to an end. "Ik bel je later terug," she whispered into the phone. "I'll call you back," before snapping it shut. "Davis. My office. Now." Reynolds's voice cracked through the lobby like a whip. Every head turned, not toward him but toward her. Serena clutched the mop handle tighter, the wooden grain biting into her palm. She walked across the lobby with her chin low, the sound of her shoes tapping against marble echoing louder than the chatter around her. For a fleeting second, she dared a glance backward. Coleman's gaze hadn't left her. It was as though he were trying to memorize her face. The stairs to the basement seemed steeper that morning, each step pulling her further away from the grand chandeliers above and deeper into the shadows where employees were reminded of their place. Colleagues watched her pass, their expressions ranging from pity to concealed satisfaction. Everyone knew what it meant to be summoned like this. Punishment was inevitable. Inside the cramped office, Reynolds closed the door with deliberate force. The walls smelled faintly of bleach and paper dust. "You know the rules," he began, pacing slowly, savoring the moment. "No phones. No personal business. Especially not in the lobby where paying guests can see." His voice dripped with authority, but beneath it lay something uglier, a satisfaction in cutting her down. Serena stood stiffly, fighting the urge to defend herself. It was the university. I don't care if it was the President of the United States," Reynolds snapped, his face reddening. "You embarrassed this hotel. Worse, you embarrassed me. And speaking in what was that? French." "Dutch," she corrected quietly, the word slipping out before she could stop it. Reynolds's eyes narrowed. I don't care if it was Martian. What matters is that Mr. Coleman saw a maid standing in his lobby chatting on the phone instead of cleaning. He leaned in, his voice a hiss. Do you understand how that looks? A maid acting like she's something more. The injustice burned in her chest like acid. She wanted to scream that she had a degree, that she spoke 6 languages fluently, that she had spent years trying to climb but had been shoved down every time. Instead, she clenched her jaw. Reynolds smirked, sensing her restraint. From tomorrow, you're assigned to the convention center bathrooms. 3 months. No overtime. Maybe you'll have plenty of time to practice all your fancy languages there. Her stomach dropped. The convention center shifts meant double the work, scrubbing until dawn, the kind of punishment designed to break people down. He dismissed her with a wave. Be grateful I'm not firing you outright. That night, in the tiny apartment she shared with 2 exhausted nurses, Surana lay awake staring at the ceiling. The frame of her linguistics degree glinted faintly from the wall, mocking her. She remembered her mother's words, whispered during their hardest days. No matter how much they try to make you feel invisible, never forget who you are. Silent tears slid down her cheeks as she thought of the opportunity she might lose once again. All her brilliance, her endless effort, trapped behind a mop and bucket. And yet, one image refused to leave her mind. Alexander Coleman's eyes, steady and searching, locked on her in that brief moment. He hadn't looked at her like she was invisible. He had looked at her as though she were the only person in that lobby who mattered. The alarm buzzed before dawn, though Surana had barely slept. Her eyes were swollen, her body heavy, but she forced herself out of bed, determined not to give Reynolds the satisfaction of seeing her falter. The memory of his smirk lingered, curling like smoke in her mind. She had been invisible for so long that even when she spoke 6 languages, even when she carried a degree on her wall, all they saw was a maid with a mop. The injustice sat in her chest like a stone. She pressed her palms against the sink, staring at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. For a moment she whispered to her own tired face, "You're worth more than this. Don't let them take that from you." Then she pulled her hair back, tied her uniform tight, and stepped into the morning cold. At the Harrington Grand, the lobby was already alive with movement. Guests wheeled suitcases, bellboys darted between doors, and the front desk buzzed with phones and clipped voices. Surana kept her head down, clutching her cleaning cart as if it were a shield. Every step toward the convention center wing felt like a sentence. She imagined the endless rows of stalls waiting for her, the smell of bleach stinging her nose, the ache that would bloom in her back by midnight. She thought of the scholarship committee in Amsterdam, of the phone call she had ended so abruptly, and wondered if opportunity had once again slipped through her fingers. Johnson, the receptionist called out sharply, then corrected herself. Davis. Her tone was almost mocking. HR wants you upstairs. Right now. Surana froze. Upstairs? The HR offices were on the top floor, next to the executive suites. No one from housekeeping ever went there unless it was for termination paperwork. Her chest tightened. The walk to the elevator felt longer than any hallway she had ever crossed. Other employees glanced at her with curiosity, whispering behind their hands. She pressed the button with trembling fingers, stepping into the mirrored box that carried her higher and higher, away from the basement where she had always been contained. The mirrored walls reflected her uniform back at her, reminding her again of where she belonged or where they believed she belonged. When the doors opened, the air itself felt different. The carpets were thicker, muffling her steps. The art on the walls was real, not framed prints. Executives strolled past her without acknowledgement, their conversation spilling with words like mergers, acquisitions, and profits. Surana hugged the cleaning cart closer to her, though she had no business bringing it there. She felt small, like a trespasser in a world not meant for her. The HR director, a tall woman with silver-rimmed glasses, looked up as Surana entered. "Please have a seat," she said, her voice neutral. Surana sat rigidly, heart pounding. She braced for the words she had dreaded all night. "Your employment has been terminated." Instead, the director adjusted her glasses and said, "Mr. Coleman has requested a meeting with you." For a moment, Surana thought she had misheard. Her throat went dry. Alexander Coleman? The owner? The man who had built hotels across continents, who appeared in magazines with politicians and CEOs. Her stomach twisted in fear and confusion. What could he possibly want with her? The walk to his office was surreal. The door alone was carved mahogany, gleaming under soft lights. A secretary ushered her in with a polite smile that made her even more nervous. The office stretched wider than her entire apartment, with windows that poured sunlight over glass and steel. And behind the vast desk, Alexander Coleman stood. He wasn't dressed in the stiff suits she imagined billionaires wore every hour of the day. His jacket was off, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, as though he had been deep in work. His eyes met hers, the same sharp gaze that had unsettled her the day before, and yet now there was something else: curiosity. Dutch, French, Italian, Mandarin, he said without preamble, reading from a folder open on his desk. Correct. Sarana blinked. Her hands fidgeted in her lap. Yes, sir. And a degree in linguistics, Georgetown University. He closed the folder slowly, as if weighing its contents. 6 years cleaning my hotels. Her breath caught. How do you dash? I asked HR for your file, he interrupted. The moment I heard you yesterday, your accent was flawless. You weren't just speaking Dutch. You were thinking in it. That kind of fluency doesn't come from a phrasebook. Sarana didn't know whether to feel honored or ashamed. All the effort she had poured into perfecting her skills, all the rejection letters, all the ignored applications, it was surreal to hear someone of his stature acknowledge it. Still, her voice trembled when she spoke. I tried, sir. 47 applications to your International Relations Department. 12 internal transfer requests. None were ever approved. Coleman leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. His eyes darkened with something that looked like realization. By whom? Mr. Reynolds. And Director Whitmore. Her answer was barely more than a whisper. She saw his jaw tighten, his pen poised above a notepad as he scribbled their names without hesitation. For a moment silence filled the room, the hum of the city beyond the windows the only sound. Then Coleman leaned forward. Tomorrow a major conference begins. Delegates from the Netherlands and China. I need someone fluent in both languages. Someone who understands nuance, not just translation. Her heart sank. You want me to clean their rooms? The bitterness slipped out before she could bite it back. For the first time, Coleman smiled faintly, though his eyes stayed serious. No, Ms. Davis. I want you to coordinate our international relations for the event. Temporarily. The salary is $5,000 a week. The room seemed to tilt. She gripped the arms of her chair to steady herself. 5,000 in 1 week, more than she made in 3 months of scrubbing bathrooms. Her mind reeled. She tried to speak, but the words tangled on her tongue. Why me? There must be candidates, hundreds of them more qualified. Because I heard you, he said simply. Because you have the qualifications I've been searching for. And because I suspect something very wrong is happening in my company. Sarana's pulse thundered in her ears. The disbelief, the hope, the fear of what came next, they collided all at once, threatening to overwhelm her. For 6 years she had been invisible, overlooked, dismissed. And now, with one phone call in Dutch and one unexpected witness, everything she thought she knew about her future began to shift. When Sarana stepped out of Alexander Coleman's office, the world felt different, as though the very air in the corridor had shifted. Her badge still identified her as housekeeping staff. Her uniform still carried the faint smell of bleach, yet inside she was trembling with the knowledge that everything might change. She pressed the elevator button with shaking fingers, replaying his words again and again. $5,000 a week. International Relations Coordinator. He had seen her. Not as a maid with a mop, but as a linguist, as someone whose mind mattered. She carried that thought like a fragile flame, afraid that at any moment someone might snuff it out. Her fears weren't unfounded. As the doors opened to the lower floors, she almost collided with Mr. Reynolds. His eyes narrowed immediately, and his voice snapped like a whip. What are you doing up here, Davis? Staff aren't allowed on executive floors. Sarana clutched her file to her chest, forcing her voice steady. Working. He scoffed, the disbelief dripping off him. Working? Unless you've been promoted to CEO, your work is in the bathrooms. Don't wander where you don't belong. The word stung more than she wanted to admit. But for once she didn't reply. She simply walked past him, her silence louder than any protest. Inside, she held tightly to Coleman's promise, though fear gnawed at her that Reynolds would find some way to ruin it. That night she could not sleep. The thought of standing among foreign delegates, of representing the hotel at a level she had never been allowed near before, both thrilled and terrified her. She pulled her linguistics degree from the wall and traced the embossed letters with her fingertips, remembering the long nights of study, the sacrifices, her mother's voice urging her never to give up. Yet tomorrow she would face more than words on a page. Tomorrow she would face an entire system that had always tried to push her aside. Morning arrived too soon. Surana, dressed in the formal suit HR had provided, the fabric crisp against her skin. When she looked in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. Gone was the maid in a faded uniform. In her place stood a woman with straightened posture, her eyes sharp with determination, though nerves coiled in her stomach like a storm. She carried herself through the hotel lobby, noticing the way people looked at her differently now. The front desk clerks whispered, managers exchanged puzzled glances. And then she saw Reynolds again. His mouth fell open slightly as he took in her tailored attire, her new badge gleaming. "What is this?" he demanded, his face flushing. Surana met his gaze, her voice calm, professional. International Relations Coordinator. Direct appointment by Mr. Coleman. The shock on his face was almost satisfying, though Surana kept her composure. She walked on, leaving him speechless in the middle of the lobby. The conference preparations were a whirlwind. Documents had to be reviewed, schedules arranged, interpreters coordinated. Surana threw herself into the work, her heart racing with each new responsibility. Then, as she combed through a stack of translation packets meant for the Chinese delegation, her eyes caught on a phrase. It was wrong, subtly, dangerously wrong. The wording, if presented, would have implied disrespect, an insult that could easily fracture negotiations. Her stomach clenched. She flipped page after page, her horror deepening. Nearly every translation was flawed, filled with errors that betrayed not just a lack of skill but a lack of cultural understanding. Whoever had produced them didn't know the language beyond surface phrases. She stayed late that night, red pen in hand, correcting each document, rewriting entire sections, cross-referencing with her own notes and knowledge. Every stroke of her pen was driven by both fear and pride. Fear that if she failed, the hotel would be humiliated, and her fragile opportunity would vanish. Pride that, for the first time, her skills mattered, her education had weight. Her eyes blurred with exhaustion, but she pressed on, her determination rooted in every rejection she had suffered before. When Coleman walked in unannounced, she jumped. He watched silently for a moment as she worked, her hand steady despite the late hour. "How did you know these were wrong?" he asked finally, his voice low. Surana set the papers aside and met his eyes. The words used are textbook correct, but culturally offensive. A single misstep in tone can destroy a partnership. Whoever translated these didn't understand that. Coleman picked up a page, his brows knitting as he read. "Whitmore assured me these were top tier. He paid a fortune for them." Surana shook her head, bitterness seeping into her tone. "He paid for incompetence." A silence stretched between them, heavy with realization. Coleman's jaw tightened as though he were piecing together a puzzle he hadn't wanted to see. "This isn't just a mistake," he murmured. "This could cost us millions. And yet you caught it in an evening." His eyes softened as they settled on her again. "You've saved us from disaster before the conference has even begun." For the first time in years, Surana felt something she had almost forgotten: validation. Her heart swelled, though she kept her expression measured. "I just did what I've trained for my whole life," she said quietly. Inside, though, her chest ached with the weight of unspoken truth. All these years she had been cleaning toilets while others with fewer skills were handed opportunities meant for people like her. That night, as she walked home under the city lights, Surana's thoughts refused to settle. She could feel the shift around her. No longer invisible, no longer ignored. But with that shift came danger. People like Reynolds and Whitmore would not let go of power easily. And if Coleman truly suspected something deeper, as his look had suggested, then she was walking into more than just a conference. She was walking into a fight against a system determined to keep her and others like her in the shadows. The morning of the conference arrived with a tension Surana could feel in her bones. The lobby of the Harrington Grand had been transformed overnight. Fresh flowers lined the entryway, banners in Dutch and Mandarin fluttered gently in the air-conditioned breeze, and staff moved with the nervous energy of a theater troupe on opening night. Surana stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, her suit pressed, her badge clipped, and yet inside she was battling the storm of anxiety that had lived with her for years. She was no longer invisible, but visibility carried its own weight. If she failed, she wouldn't just lose this chance, she would confirm every lie people like Reynolds had ever told about her. Delegates began to arrive, their voices blending into a chorus of languages. Surana moved among them carefully, translating greetings, smoothing over awkward pauses, ensuring that gestures matched words. Every time she opened her mouth, she felt her chest tighten, but then the fluency flowed, her mind leaping nimbly from Dutch to Mandarin to English. The astonishment on the delegates' faces fed her courage. For once she was not overlooked. She was the bridge, the voice that carried meaning where silence or error might have broken trust. It was during a break between sessions that the first shock came. A tall man with silver hair and a heavy accent approached her. "You," he said, pointing with disbelief. "Are you the same Surana Davis who wrote on linguistic variation in global trade?" The recognition hit her like a wave. That article written years earlier for a journal she assumed no one had ever read, had taken nights of study and endless revisions. Her cheeks warmed as she nodded. "Yes, that was me." The man beamed, calling his colleagues over. "I cited your work twice at conferences. Remarkable insight. And here you are." Their admiration drew curious looks, and Surana saw Coleman across the room, his sharp eyes fixed on her again, this time with unmistakable satisfaction. But not all eyes were kind. At the edge of the room, Mr. Reynolds whispered furiously with Director Whitmore, their faces taut with unease. Surana knew instinctively that recognition brought risk. The more she proved herself, the more dangerous she became to men who had kept her buried for years. Later that evening, while reviewing documents one final time, Surana discovered something that made her blood run cold. A new translation packet had been slipped into the folders, marked Final. She flipped through it quickly, her hands tightening with every page. The same errors she had corrected only days before had returned, each one carefully placed as though to sabotage the negotiations. At the bottom of the folder, the translation company's name stood bold and familiar, Whitmore Language Services. Her chest constricted. Whitmore wasn't just incompetent, he was profiting from it, funneling contracts to a company that bore his family name. The realization struck like lightning. Years of rejections, years of overlooked resumes, it all made sense. She hadn't been ignored because she lacked ability. She had been blocked because her presence threatened the corruption that lined others' pockets. Rage rose in her throat, bitter and raw, but she forced herself to steady. This was bigger than her pain. It was about every qualified employee buried under the weight of nepotism and prejudice. She gathered evidence quietly, snapping photos of the documents, cross-referencing them with the errors she had already corrected. She felt her hands tremble, not just with fear of being caught, but with the enormity of what she was uncovering. If this came to light, it wouldn't just be her career that shifted. It could bring down powerful people who had always assumed their actions would remain hidden. Coleman entered the room unexpectedly, his footsteps soft against the carpet. "You're still here," he observed, his gaze falling on the scattered papers. Surana hesitated, then handed him the flawed packet. "They tried to replace my corrections," she said, her voice tight. "The errors are the same as before. These translations could destroy our negotiations." Coleman read silently, his expression hardening with each line. When he finally looked up, his eyes were sharp as glass. "Whitmore assured me this company was the best in the field. He paid tens of thousands for this." Surana's throat tightened. He didn't hire the best. He hired his niece. For a moment the air between them was heavy, unspoken truths pressing in from every side. Coleman exhaled slowly, his jaw set. "This isn't just negligence. This is theft." He looked at her with something deeper than curiosity now, something like respect. "And you caught it." The next morning, the conference resumed under a tense cloud. Surana stood at the edge of the stage as delegates filed in, her heart pounding with every step they took. She was carrying a secret that could shake the foundation of the very hotel she worked in. Coleman's presence behind her steadied her nerves, but she knew that the battle was only beginning. Whitmore and Reynolds were circling like vultures, watching her every move, waiting for a stumble. Yet as she translated conversations seamlessly, guiding discussions with care, she saw the growing admiration in the eyes of the delegates. They didn't see her as a maid, as invisible as less. They saw her as indispensable. For Surana it was more than validation. It was vindication. And with every sentence she spoke, she felt the chains of invisibility break, piece by piece. But deep inside, she knew the confrontation was inevitable. She had evidence in her hands and corruption in her sights. The question that pulsed through her like a drumbeat was simple yet terrifying. When the truth came out, would Coleman stand with her or would she once again be left alone in the shadows? The final day of the conference arrived with the kind of tension that made even the air feel heavier. Surana stood near the entrance of the ballroom, her notes clutched tightly in her hands, her pulse drumming like a warning. She had carried secrets in silence all week, gathering evidence of Whitmore's fraudulent contracts, of Reynolds's petty cruelties, of the quiet, systematic ways talent like hers had been buried. And now the moment she feared and hoped for in equal measure had arrived. Across the room, she spotted Whitmore ushering a young woman toward the front. The girl's nervous smile and the folder she held made Surana's chest tighten. She already knew what was inside. Those same corrupted translations, presented again as if her corrections meant nothing. She caught Coleman's eye from across the room. His jaw tightened when he saw the girl's surname on the folder. Whitmore's niece. The truth was no longer speculation. It was standing in front of them, parading incompetence disguised as expertise. Coleman motioned subtly for Surana to follow him out into the corridor. She hurried after him, the adrenaline rushing through her veins. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" he asked in a low voice, his tone grave. Surana pulled her phone from her pocket, showing him the photos she had taken, each one carefully documenting the errors and linking them to inflated payments. "Every page," she said firmly, though her hands trembled. "Every single contract has the same mistakes. And I found proof the certification she claims is fake. I confirmed it with the university." Coleman scanned the images, his expression hardening with each swipe. At last, he closed his eyes briefly, as though making a decision that carried the weight of years. "Then we cannot stay silent any longer." Minutes later, an announcement called all managers, staff, and delegates into the executive auditorium. The room filled quickly, voices murmuring with confusion. The Dutch and Chinese delegates took their seats in the front row, their brows furrowed, while employees filed into the back rows. Reynolds sat stiffly near the aisle, his lips pressed into a thin line. Whitmore walked in with forced confidence, the young woman clutching her folder beside him. Surana stood near the stage, her heart hammering as Coleman stepped forward. His presence quieted the room instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Coleman began, his voice calm but edged with steel. "For years this hotel has built its reputation on excellence, integrity, and trust. But today we face a betrayal of those very principles." A hush fell over the crowd. Coleman gestured for Surana to join him. She walked slowly to his side, every eye in the room burning into her. Her palms dampened, but she kept her head high. "Ms. Davis has uncovered evidence of systematic fraud and discrimination within our operations," Coleman continued. "What began as errors in translation could have cost us millions. But beneath those errors lies something far darker." He clicked a remote, and the screen behind them flickered to life. Charts appeared, comparison of employee applications, rejection rates by race and gender, inflated invoices paid to Whitmore's family company. Gasps rippled through the audience. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. Whitmore's confident mask cracked as whispers grew louder. Surana felt her chest rise and fall with each revelation, the years of silence unraveling in one public moment. Her humiliation, her tears, her invisibility, they were no longer hers to carry alone. They were laid bare for all to see. Whitmore leapt to his feet, his voice rising. "This is nonsense. Lies spread by a cleaning maid desperate for attention." The words sliced through Surana like a blade, but Coleman's glare silenced him. "Enough," Coleman thundered. "This maid speaks 6 languages, holds a degree from Georgetown, and has saved this conference from disaster. She is more qualified than anyone you've ever hired. The only thing desperate here is your attempt to protect a scheme that lined your pockets while you buried talent in broom closets." The delegates in the front row nodded, murmuring approval. Some even began to clap softly. Surana stood straighter, her throat tight with emotion. For the first time, she was not defending herself in shadows. She was being defended, acknowledged, uplifted in front of those who had always looked past her. Coleman's final words rang through the hall like a verdict. Effective immediately, Thomas Whitmore is terminated for cause. Sarah Reynolds is suspended pending investigation. And Surana Davis will assume the role of Director of International Relations. The room erupted. Some applauded with genuine enthusiasm, others sat in stunned silence, their carefully built hierarchies collapsing in real time. At the back, the cleaning crew clapped the loudest, tears shining in their eyes. Surana's vision blurred as emotion surged. She had dreamed of this moment in lonely nights, had begged the universe for even a chance to prove herself. Now it was real, unfolding in front of colleagues who had once treated her as invisible. As Whitmore was escorted out by security, his glare burned into her. Hatred and disbelief twisted together. He muttered something vile under his breath, but Surana hardly heard him. She was too focused on the weight lifting from her shoulders, the sudden flood of relief and justice. She glanced at Coleman, who nodded once, his expression firm but proud. In that nod was the recognition she had craved all her life. That night, long after the auditorium had emptied and the conference halls had gone quiet, Surana sat in her new office. It overlooked the city, lights stretching endlessly into the horizon. On the desk lay the contract she had signed that afternoon, her new title gleaming in black ink. Director. She pressed her hand against the words, tears slipping down her cheeks. They were not tears of pain this time, but of release, of triumph, of years of silent worth finally shouted aloud. She picked up the phone and dialed the number she knew by heart. When her mother's tired voice answered, Surana's throat closed. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "I did it. I finally did it." And in that quiet office, with the city lights bearing witness, Surana Davis allowed herself to believe what she had always known deep down, that no matter how hard they tried to make her invisible, her worth had never belonged to them. If Surana's journey moved you, don't just watch, be part of it. Hit that like button to show that hidden talent deserves to shine. Share this story with someone who needs encouragement today. And subscribe so you never miss stories of resilience that inspire change. And let me ask you this: have you ever seen someone underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong? Tell us in the comments. Your story might give hope to someone who needs it right now.